Hey everybody, this is a piece from The Fate of the Russian Revolution, Lost Texts of Critical Marxism, edited by Matgamna. This is a piece by Louis Jacobs titled Stalin's Slave Laborers. I was trying to find out something about Louis Jacobs, and it looks like their name is like their real name is Jack Weber, or Jack Weber. I guess that's actually how you'd say it in the United States. This is from New International, July 1947. Here we go. History records no greater crime than that of the Stalinist regime in its treatment of the victims in the concentration camps. Hitler's methods were not original. They ran parallel with, if they were not mere copies of those utilized by Stalin. If Hitler sent millions of people, primarily the Jews, into the gas chambers, the Russian camps have crushed, dehumanized, and done to death more victims than all other concentration camps combined. For a time, the war brought a decrease in the slave labor population of the lagers, as Stalin's hellholes are called. I can't find anything for that. But this was only because the Kremlin found it necessary to use many of the male prisoners as a stopgap in the front lines, where they were quickly mowed down. This was part of the price paid by Russia for Stalin's being taken by surprise, despite all the warnings that the Nazis would invade Russia. The end of the war once again reversed the trend. The faraway Siberian wastes are filling up anew. The slave labor enterprises of the MVD, the GPU, are operating full blast. There is, nevertheless, a distinct difference so far as the outside world is concerned. Humanity has, to all appearances, remained quite indifferent over a period of years to the stifled cry of slave laborers of the GPU. The evidence of the frightful conditions maintained in the lagers came about before the outbreak of the war in a thin trickle only, but the fog created by Stalinist propaganda is being dissipated by the quantitative weight of unimpeachable testimony. Hitler and Mussolini have disappeared from the scene, leaving behind only the despicable Franco. Now the workers of the world will be brought face to face with the Soviet dictator Stalin and his methods. There was one practice among others that Stalin and Hitler had in common. Their armies carried with them in their conquest lists of, quote, undesirables, who were to be arrested immediately. It is hardly surprising that both lists were headed by revolutionists. First on Stalin's list were Trotskyists, members of pre-revolutionary parties such as the Mensheviks, the Social Revolutionaries, and Anarchists. One such list that fell into foreign hands had 14 categories. The 8th included refugees, political emigres from other countries. The 10th, any persons who had traveled abroad. Last of all came aristocrats, landowners, wealthy merchants, bankers, and industrialists. Stalinism reintroduced Asiatic justice into Russia, for it takes not individuals who are wanted, but their entire families. It goes even further. In the course of raids on some house or other in search of an individual, frequently enough the GPU arrests everybody in the house for whatever reason. The mass deportations from Poland were planned by the GPU in 4 great waves, in February, April, and June of 1940, and again in June 1941. The first waves caught in the net representatives of all political parties of whatever shade of opinion, including the leaders of all Polish, White Russian, Ukrainian, and Jewish socialist organizations and of socialist trade unions, members of working-class committees, organizers of working-class, peasant, and other youth institutions. The utterly cynical use of these, quote, purges is summed up in that which took place in June 1941. Up to that time, the GPU had utilized local committees of communists and sympathizers and even workers' militias. These local communists had often enough helped choose those to be deported to Siberia. Their own turn came last. All those who had had any kind of dealings whatsoever directly with the Red Army, all known communists, were shipped off in the 4th series of raids. What a curious light, let us say it mildly, that throws on the policy advocated by some Trotskyists to have Polish workers and partisan militias place themselves under the direct command of the Red Army generals! Exclamation point. That policy certainly facilitated the task of the GPU of uprooting every vestige of working-class independence. The description of the deportation trains is poignant and tragic beyond words. The utter indifference to considerations of common humanity evinced by the Red Army Guards is a measure of the dehumanizing effects of life under Stalinism. The Poles thought first that this was due to the Russian hatred of Poland. Not at all. Quote, "It was still very difficult for people coming from outside the Union to understand that such things could be everyday sights, that members of these people's own families, their fellow workers or neighbors, might as easily have been transported in similar trains and to similar destinations, ... It was still some time before they understood that all this was not some otherwise unheard of proceeding against themselves as foreigners, but that the whole system and the institutions to which they were being taken had, in fact, come into existence and continue to exist as a normal part of life for Soviet citizens." End quote. All Russian literature of Tsarist times is the profound contribution of that literature to the world, is permeated with the deepest feelings of humanity, to the very point of inward torture. Stalinism has, at least outwardly, registered its greatest success in creating the complete atomizing of society in place of solidarity. Each is content on his own salvation and is trained by terror to show utter lack of any concern for the suffering of his neighbor. This is true of ordinary life. It is trebly so in the lagers, which I don't know if these are, that's just another word for gulag, which I think it is, where the sheer problem of survival brutalizes every living soul. A survivor gives the description of the long march from the detraining center from the detraining center to the camp. Quote, "A 19-year-old boy with blood pouring from his lungs fell for the last time and was so savagely beaten with rifles that, in the words of the witness reporting it, quote, he was beaten into the ground," end quote, end quote. Since law meant nothing at all, the GPU being a law unto itself, everything was arbitrary. The crowding of prisoners in trains, then in prison cells, was something incredible, a countrywide practice of the Black Hole of Calcutta. It is surprising that in prisons also the terms used by the wardens have become once again identical with those used in Tsarist times. So, is it surprising that in prison also the terms used by the wardens have become once again identical with those used in Tsarist times? A well-known socialist sums up the treatment of prisoners as follows, quote, "The prisoner is to get it into his head as soon as possible that he is nothing but a thing, and that nobody has any reason to be particular about the way he treats him," end quote. Stalinism is shown at its, quote, purest in the slave labor camps. Here's the final outcome of the GPU system. The Russian prisoners have a saying, quote, "Nobody leaves lager behind. Lager is forever," end quote. Yet occasionally a medical commission makes the rounds and releases from labor the total wrecks who have not yet died. Quote, "In September and October 1941, a medical commission from Magadan visited some of the Kolyma mining and lumber camps. Magadan is a port town and administrative center of Magadan Oblast, Russia. The city is located in the isthmus of the Staritsky Peninsula by the Negev Bay. It serves as a gateway to the Kolyma region. And it says Kolyma is a historic region in the Russian Far East that includes the basin of Kolyma River and the northern shores of the Sea of Okhotsk, as well as the Kolyma Mountains, the watershed of the two. It is bounded to the north by the East Siberian Sea and the Arctic Ocean, and by the Sea of Okhotsk to the south. Kolyma Krai was never formally defined, and over time it was split among various administrative units. As of 2023, it consists roughly of the Magadan Oblast, northeastern areas of Yakutia, and Bilebinsky district of Chukotka Autonomous Okrug. Back to the text. A long procession of human phantoms appeared in the town and were put into ships. Those who saw them go aboard could hardly believe they were human. It was a procession not of human beings, but of corpses and trunks. The majority had neither noses, lips, nor ears. Many were armless and legless. Among these was a handful only of Poles. The rest were all Soviet citizens. The Magadan Commission had recognized them as being unfit for work. In Magadan it was said that, once aboard ship, they were taken out to sea and drowned, but there is not any proof of this." End quote. There is a Soviet, quote, "opera," end quote, unknown to the rest of the world. It is just the kind of grotesque and gruesome occurrence that one would expect under the rule of Stalin. In many of the camps, the slave laborers are accompanied to work each morning by a Russian orchestra. The prisoners sing to its accompaniment a mournful dirge. Quote, "And if you don't accomplish the norm, they give you only 300 grams of bread," end quote. Food is distributed by, quote, "kettle," of which 4 or more categories are prescribed. From the punishment kettle up to the special kettle of the trustee, the kettle depends upon the amount of work accomplished, the unit being an impossible norm rarely if ever achieved. The slaves must put in 12 hours of hard labor besides the hours of exhausting marching to and from the places of work. After the invasion of Russia by the Nazis, there were never any free days. No political prisoners were allowed to hold any sort of administrative posts, even the most minor. Such posts, when held by prisoners, were given to the common criminals of the underworld. These brigade leaders became bestial slave drivers in order to protect their own few privileges, above all those connected with food. One survived, under a system bound to be corrupt from top to bottom, only through, quote, "blot," inadequately translated as graft. It is the extent of the slave labor camps that freezes one's blood as much as the unmitigated blackness of their administration. Quote, "From this first-hand evidence, it is known that vast regions about Kyubyshev, in northern Siberia and in Kazakhstan, with, to the north, the whole of the Komi Republic up to Archangel, with Novaya Zmelya, have camps of this kind along almost every kilometer," end quote. In all this territory, the MVD holds complete sway. There exist only guards and guarded. This tremendous GPU state is divided into zones, each territory enclosed within barbed wire, patrolled by armed guards and their dogs, and made doubly secure by lookout towers and stork's nests containing sentries. The population of these camps has never been divulged, but is estimated anywhere from 10 to 20 millions of souls. Let's see what history says. When I click it, I mean, I don't know where this source is coming from, but yeah, I can't seem to really actually see what the final the actual number is. Wikipedia says that about 18 million people passed through the Gulag's camps. 53 Gulag camp directorates, colloquially referred to as simply camps, and 423 labor colonies in the Soviet Union as of March 1940. The tentative consensus in contemporary Soviet historiography is that 1,600,000 people died due to detention in the camps. So yeah, it's anywhere from 10 to 20 million souls. So that's more closer to 20 million by historical reckoning. All these slaves are engaged in the building of canals, railroads, roads, and bridges, factories, towns, ports, mining, forest clearing, or in cultivating gigantic state farms of 10 to 20,000 hectares. The concentration camps of Stalin, euphemistically called, quote, corrective labor camps, end quote, are the index of the fear in the hearts of the Russian rulers and of the terror required to hold down the Russian population. A regime built on measures of this kind and on so vast a scale is inevitably one of profound crisis. But like all such phenomena, it takes on an independent development of its own with its own, quote, vested interests. It is a source of vast profit to the state rulers and to the GPU. The Gulag, the labor camp administration, tries to fill in the glaring gaps due to failures in the bureaucratic 5-year plans. The interstices of these plans, based on the most intense exploitation of the Russian proletariat, are cemented with slave labor outright. The turnover of labor in the giant clusters of camps is an important factor to be reckoned with in its effects on Russian life. 20 to 30% of deaths each year in the mines of the Far East and Far North are common. Those who are released after serving their terms are required to stay put in the places of exile, but are still counted as, quote, lost to the GPU. Replacements are ordered by the Gulag from the countrywide collection centers. Kravchenko showed how these demands from above influence arrest and rearrest on any available pretext or none at all. Is Kravchenko the I Choose Freedom guy? Yeah. He is. Viktor Kravchenko lived from 1905 to 1966 and was a Ukrainian-born Soviet defector known for writing the best-selling book I Chose Freedom, published in 1946, about the realities of life in the Soviet Union. Kravchenko defected to the United States during World War II and began writing about his experience as an official in the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Back to the text. Kravchenko showed how these demands from above influence arrest and rearrest on any available pretext or none at all. In colonial days, the English resorted to impressment for their navy or for colonizing of the New World, but never in all history has there been outright enslavement in any country on such a scale. Uncle Tom's Cabin made a great appeal against the separation of families under slavery. This is a commonplace of Soviet life. In fact, there is a special camp in the Karaganda cluster in Central Asia known as the, quote, wives camp, and used for the wives and widows of former Soviet leaders. Karaganda is the capital of Karaganda region, Kazakhstan, is the 5th most populous city in Kazakhstan behind Almaty, Alma-Ata, Astana, Shymkent, and Aktobe. Population 497,777. That doesn't matter, fuck that. But Karaganda in Kazakhstan. It is clear why Stalin needs an Iron Curtain. He has much to hide. Not all that he would like to keep hidden has to do with military secrets. When the Poles began their trek back after their belated release, the big majority of them remained buried in Russian earth. Stalin did his best to force them to become Soviet citizens in order not to let them out with the information they possessed. Stalin claimed that the Jews taken from Poland were Soviet citizens, as in the case of Ehrlich and Alter. Henrik Ehrlich, might be who is being referred to here, was an activist of the General Jewish Labor Bund in Poland, a Petrograd Soviet member, and a member of the Executive Committee of the Second International. says that Alter refers to Victor Alter, who lived from 1890 to 1943 and was a Polish Jewish socialist activist and Bund publicist and a member of the executive committee of the Second International. Referring to his execution, Alter began to organize the International Jewish Anti-Fascist Committee. During his time, he established contacts with Stanislav Kot, the Polish ambassador in Moscow, and called for Polish Jews in the Soviet Union to join the Polish Anders Army. In October 1941, Alter, together with Henryk Ehrlich, were placed by the Soviet authorities in a hotel in Kyubyshev, Samar. During private conversations, which were taped and reported to Joseph Stalin, the two discussed the rumors about the murder of Polish officers, including many Polish Jews at Katyn. On the 4th of December 1941, he was again arrested by the NKVD together with Ehrlich and murdered, although the precise details about his death are unknown. According to some reports, he was sentenced to death on the 23rd of December 1941 and immediately executed. Other sources state that his execution did not take place until February 1943. The death sentence was signed by Vyacheslav Molotov in a note to Lavrenti Beria, stating that Stalin had personally approved the order. In 1943, Soviet authorities issued a communique which announced that Victor Alter had been executed for, quote, spying for Hitler, end quote. His execution on Stalin's orders provoked an international outcry. Back to the text. Stalin claimed that the Jews taken from Poland were Soviet citizens, as in the case of Ehrlich and Alter. He finally permitted the 150,000 of them, survivors of over 500,000, to emigrate. The loss to the camps in this process was made up with German, Italian, and Japanese prisoners of war. It was also made up with those Russian prisoners of war who were repatriated from Western Europe, those of them who were not shot outright for having committed the crime of seeing too much of the outside world. Stalin is fearful concerning the Russians who have fled abroad, including a large number of Red Army deserters. They may become the new centers of resistance, just as did the exiles under the Tsar. The challenge to humanity that exists in such glaring form in the Russian slave labor camps cannot be ignored without extreme peril to the working class of the entire world. If it is the workers everywhere who must free themselves and all the oppressed, it is certainly the workers of all other countries who must come to the aid of the workers ground into the dust in Russia. There are those who would remain silent on this question because they fear that any agitation against Russian slave labor will become a weapon in the hands of the imperialists who seek in time to wage war on Russia. There is no better weapon with which to arm these imperialists than working-class silence on this life-and-death matter. If the vanguard of the workers is unable to rally the working class in fierce protest against such inhumanity, then reaction will seize on the issue for its own purposes at a suitable time. To fail to raise this issue without let-up because of a fear that reaction will profit from it means only that one does not know how to make use of the issue in Marxist fashion. Silence means to participate in the worst crime in all history. It is hard to believe that the working class, with the facts already known, can allow another May Day to pass without the cry, "Down with Stalin's slave labor camps." We Trotskyists owe a special duty to these comrades who gave so heroic an example to the world. It is now revealed in the testimony gathered by S. Mora and P. Zverniak in La Justice Soviétique, as quoted by the Menshevik Stalin, whose factual gathering of material is most praiseworthy, though his motives fall under the shadow of imperialism, at the camp of Vorkuta. Several dozen of them, while they were still together, quote, decided to externalize the people's memory of them by a last manifestation of their inflexible will, and thus remained victorious even if condemned to hard labor, end quote. They presented demands claiming the right of political prisoners to be separated from the criminals, the right of the employed only for work corresponding to their professions, and the right not to be separated. They then started a hunger strike until success or death, a hunger strike lasting for 120 days without interruption. Many died despite forced feeding. Quote, when all the efforts to break their spirit proved ineffective, the Trotskyists were separated with the help of a pack of fierce dogs unleashed in their barracks. End quote. All were certainly shot later. The memory of these brave ones is surely eternal. Their challenge to us must be met. The Russian phenomenon of slave labor is a challenge also to our theories. Never forget that the camps control vast sections, states within a state, of, quote, nationalized property, end quote. This nationalized property, mines, factories, forests, railroads, is completely in the hands of the GPU. Such nationalized property has become completely identified with direct state slave labor. It is kind of a, quote, pure form, end quote, of the tendency that exists under completely reactionary Stalinism. It is the most urgent warning that the mere words, quote, nationalized property, end quote, or any formula using these mere words without complete and concrete analysis is dangerous and misleading. Nationalized property under Stalinism, in or out of the concentration camps, is permitted to serve the masses not in the slightest degree. Our deepest sympathies go everywhere to the exploited and oppressed masses. We defend them, their welfare, their conquest, not those of the privileged and exploiting minority. The concentration camps in Russia, with their millions of forced laborers, are an important part of the evidence that the nationalized property taken by the masses in the October Revolution has been wrested completely from the hands of the working class. That property today serves the interests of the rulers completely. The Wallaces, fearful of any new revolution inside Russia because such a revolution will endanger the entire capitalist system which they defend, shut their eyes to the existence of bestial slave labor in Russia. But only such a revolution can free the millions of political prisoners from the loggiers and prisons. Only such a revolution can restore the nationalized property to the masses from whom it was usurped. The American working class can help their suffering Russian brothers and sisters along the path to the renewal of the socialist revolution by protesting in one mighty voice against the retention of the concentration camps for slave labor in Russia. Thanks for listening.